We sing in worship. I like that. I'm going to start today with an apology. I know that the children's message is usually a smaller version of the full message, but I apologize today because while the water in the children's message represented God's grace and love breaking through, the waters in this message are actually chaos and greed and power. So I apologize that there's a difference, but it's important that you get that I've shifted gears now. Now we do want to try and hold this back. The story of the Exodus, is a story of the Israelites enslaved down in Egypt. And in their slavery, they have to make bricks. They make bricks, and out of that, we're told that they made cities out of these bricks. And Pharaoh got so worried about their continuing growth in population and in popularity, he decided that they were going to have to go and collect their own straw in order to make the bricks. But he said, you still got to make the same number of bricks, even though now you've got to go out and get the straw as well to do all of this menial labor. So it was tough, and they complained about it, and Pharaoh said to them, you're just lazy. Looking down at the hard workers who are actually enslaved in his nation and saying, you're just lazy and complainers. Well, they got their freedom. I think you probably know a little bit of the story of Moses and let my people go, and then leading them out into liberation, 40 years in the wilderness. But before they get there, they have to cross the Red Sea, and the Red Sea is parted. And Moses doesn't quite make it to the promised land with them. But as they're approaching the promised land, they're now led by Joshua. And in Joshua chapter 3, they need to cross water again. This time, it's the Jordan River that is there. It's like crossing the Red Sea, and if you read Joshua chapter 3, Joshua commands the priests to walk down into the water with the Ark of the Covenant and stand in the Jordan. Upstream, the waters pile up, and downstream, it just turns dry. And all of Israel passed through on dry land. That's what Joshua 3 says. But I want you to note in that story, as I read it and relay it to you, Joshua does not send down into the waters to hold them back the former bricklayers or the harvesters of straw, not the menial laborers, nor the young or the old, to hold back the river waters so that the priests and the politicians and the wealthy can pass through unscathed. Instead, God has Joshua send the spiritual leaders to hold back the forces of the water to make space for all to pass. And if you read that Joshua 3, it happens time and time. All pass through. Verse 17 says, while all Israel were crossing over on dry ground, the priests who bore the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan until the entire nation finished crossing over the Jordan. And then in the very next verse, when the whole nation had crossed over, then the story continues. I want you to think of this in terms of last week's sermon when I suggested that pastors are crossing guards. Pastors as crossing guards encourage people to cross the street and are there to kind of hold back the traffic, be sure it stops so people can get to the other side, because one of the things Christianity needs to do is get on the move. Pastor as crossing guard. Today's story imagines something more difficult than holding back traffic. Picture the power of a river or a flood or a storm that threatens to drown everyone. Now, let's make a movie, all right? We're gonna film this. What was the original Moses? Was that Charlton Heston? Was that one thing holding back the waters? We're not doing the Red Sea. We're doing the Jordan River. We've got Joshua who sends the priests down in. Now, I can remember, I know a bunch of pastors. You're like, you want me to go in there? But they're going to go, right? They're going to go down, and they're going to take the Ark of the Covenant, and they're going to hold back the water so everyone, every single person can pass through on dry ground. So we're going to film this, right? And I know that one way to film it is to have these pastors that they go and then they sit down and they cross their legs if they can. And then they, Om, and just magically it all gets held back and people can pass through on dry ground. That's one way that you could film it, but that's not what I imagine. What I imagine as we create this film of Joshua and the priests, what I imagine is something a little bit more like the Battle of Hogwarts. All you Harry Potter fans, welcome to the sermon. Now you can pay attention. The Battle of Hogwarts. What happens, Voldemort and all the bad guys are coming and they're throwing everything they can at Hogwarts. And the professors and the Order of Phoenix and some of the students, they're all trying to do whatever they can to protect Hogwarts. And so they're standing there with their wands. They're casting spells, but it's just not, you don't just say a spell and it happens. You can see in it that it takes all the force and energy and power that they have to hold off those forces that are trying to break through. They're not just saying, Om. It's not thoughts and prayers that are holding it back. It takes effort. It takes intention to make it happen, to hold that back. So if I'm filming this, priests and pastors get a wand. I want one. I want a wand that I can just use and hold that stuff back so people can pass through on dry land. And not just the people that I choose, all pass through on dry land. So today I see the pastor as grand wizard, desperately trying to hold back the storm. Do you know the phrase to stem the tide? To stem the tide. It's from Middle English stemmen, to dam up, or the Lithuanian stumyti, which means to shove, to hold that space for others. The role of the community of faith in today's Hebrew story is to stem the powerful tide of history, the powerful tide of culture, the powerful tide of greed that all threaten to sweep away the poor, the sick, and the weak. Called to hold that space, whatever it takes. Unfortunately, many pastors today often abdicate this responsibility. The ones who are going to get down in the mud and create that dry space for everyone. It happens generation after generation in certain places and in certain people and in certain cultures. The Hebrew scriptures in Micah 3, 5 through 12, the spiritual leaders have lost their way. They eat their fill and they declare peace while declaring war against those who are hungry. These spiritual leaders kowtow to the rulers who abhor justice and they pervert equity and seek only their own financial gain and security. Unlike them, Micah is a true prophet filled with power, with the Spirit of the Lord, and with justice and with might. I can think of a couple of stories related to this. One is when Constantine converted to Christianity, like around 312. Was it 312 or 314? Anyway, one of the early Christian history writers talks about all these Christians that were like huddled in homes, many of them persecuted in a variety of different ways. They gathered in homes in fear, but they wanted to share the gospel message with one another. And now all of a sudden, they're bishops in flowing robes, and they're walking through the halls of the emperor's home to dine with the emperor. Things changed in that moment, who they understood themselves to be called to be and what they were supposed to be about. When Catherine and I took our cruise down, we went to the Mayan ruins at Tulum, and there was a guide who took us around. There's these pyramids down in Mexico, and he was there to tell us about all that was there, and he had pictures of certain parts of the architecture where at certain solstice things would shine a certain way, and we didn't see it because we weren't there for that, but he had pictures to show us just the incredible math and development and things that they were able to develop in that Mayan culture. But one of the things that was interesting that he said, this whole complex that we were standing in is where the priests and the politicians and the wealthy lived. He said, we've lost the thousands and thousands of people that lived in straw huts outside of this place. They were the ones that did all the work. They were the ones who sacrificed everything for those who were on the inside. It's not too hard for priests to lose their way, for pastors to forget what they're supposed to be about. And so, I love Micah. We've already referenced Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you religious folk? Loving kindness and walking humbly with God, and what did I leave out? Do justice. And it even comes first. Do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. Now I'm going to take a slight detour, and I know sometimes it's hard to follow me in my thought process and stuff, but do you know what chivalry is? I mean, some say chivalry is dead, right? Chivalry, when I was younger, chivalry represented certain practices of men toward women. Things like opening a door or pulling out a chair. But in more recent years, I've come to see that chivalry is not only practices toward women, but also attitudes toward women that sometimes include ideas like they are weaker, incapable, and in need of our protection. Or chivalry that actually becomes a form of patriarchy or paternalism or sexist benevolence. I like to be nice, but I do not want to be those things or participate in those things or perpetuate those things. Instead, what if we replace the word chivalry with courtesy? Courtesy. While chivalry is a one-way practice of men toward women, or for women, or over women, courtesy is a mutual practice that honors people for who they are and what they might need in a moment. One of the old images of chivalry is of a man laying down his coat over a puddle so that a woman can step over without getting wet. Is that familiar? I mean, some old movies and old pictures and that kind of thing. If we can turn that image toward courtesy, we might be reminded of John the Baptist's call to give our coats away to those who go without. In Luke chapter 3, John says, "Whoever has 2 coats must share with anyone who has none. And whoever has food must share with those who are hungry. Those who have plenty give away to those who are in need." Likewise, Jesus said, "If anyone sues you for your coat, give them your cloak as well." These are important, direct commands to common human decency, a reminder of the church's mission to care for those who are struggling. So putting down our coats or giving them away are important commands and metaphors for the church's mission. But lately I've been thinking about a couple of other phrases or metaphors which also involve removing clothing. Taking off the gloves. What does that phrase mean? If somebody says, "Oh, gloves are coming off now," what does that mean? It's about to get real. And dirty, messy, might even be turned to violence in some form or another. Or another one is throwing down the gauntlet. It's a challenge, right? It's a challenge. The gauntlet is the glove piece of a piece of armor, but we've all heard that phrase, throwing down the gauntlet. Things are about to get real. Things are going to be challenging in a variety of different ways. I wonder maybe if the church spends too much time laying down our coats and not enough time throwing down the gauntlet like the prophet Micah. You might recall the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. advised, "Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love." we're good at giving out our coats. We're good at collecting food for people that need it. We're good at doing a variety of things that care for people. But somewhere along the way, the church needs to find its voice. Emmanuel Cleaver III, was at the march I was at on Thursday. Jules Scott was there as well. It was one of our marches to push back against white Christian nationalism. And we were down south of the plaza on Warner Road, close to Kansas City UCC, really. And there were several speakers, and we were pushing back against white Christian nationalism. And Emmanuel Cleaver III was speaking, and he said several stories and some wonderful, wonderful stuff. But one of the things he said, he told the story of a guy who was going out of the country right before Mother's Day, and he wanted to do something for his mother, but he was going to be gone and actually out of touch. He wasn't going to be able to call her on Mother's Day. And so he went and he bought her a parrot, this beautiful parrot, and made sure that it would be delivered to her on Mother's Day. And he was gone for 3 weeks. And when he got back, he says, Mom, did you get the parrot? She said, yeah, I did. And he said, well, what do you think? And she said, it tasted delicious. He said, Mom, that parrot speaks 3 languages. 3 languages. How could you possibly have cooked that parrot? And she said, well, if it speaks 3 languages, it should have said something. Mm-hmm. The church needs to say something. We've got the language of care and love, but there needs to be a language that says, hey, this is not who Jesus called us to be. The church needs to speak out. The church needs to find its voice. And so I'm going to invite you to give voice right now. Just name something that's going on in the world that we need to say something about. You don't have to say it all. Just tell us something that's going on that the church needs to find a voice. Discrimination. Hate. Telling lies. War. Attacking Haitian immigrants. Dirty politics. Hungry children. Love is love. I'm sorry, I missed this one. Depression. Reproductive rights. Blindly following others. There's a whole long list. Some of it came to us in our prayers this morning as Kristen was reading from our friends online. There are so many things that are trying to rush in. And the ability to have integrity in the midst of it, to still be a loving presence, but at some point to say, no, enough is enough, to hold back the water. And it doesn't happen through thoughts and prayers. Prayers doesn't hurt, but prayers is supposed to kick you to where you get that wand out and you fight to hold that stuff back, to try to become who it is that God calls us to be. One of the things the church can do and needs to do is vote. And I'm not going to tell you how to vote. Another church did that, and we got 4 new members out of it many, many years ago. But when you're pushing back against white Christian nationalism, you remember the words of Reverend Raphael Warnock, who said, a vote is a kind of prayer for the kind of world we desire for ourselves and for our children. And I think our prayers are stronger when we pray together. And so he means vote together. And so I appreciate Deb's announcement this morning because it's so important that we get out there and use our voice to try to make a difference in the world and in our nation and in our community in any way that we can. The next march against white Christian nationalism on behalf of the beloved community is October 17th. It's Thursday at noon. I know some of you are going to be in school, some of you may be at work, but those who are available, I'm going to invite you to join us at the Peace Pavilion up by the Community of Christ in Independence. and we're going to have a couple of speakers there, and then we're going to walk over to the courthouse, and we're going to have a speaker there, and we're just going to show up and say, white Christian nationalism is not who Jesus calls us to be. Just another way of saying no, and a way of saying yes to beloved community and that idea of who it is we can be together. Please join me in prayer. O God of life and love and laughter, we ask that your Spirit stirs in the church once again and helps us to find our voice. Find our voice to speak out against those things so that we can hold back the waters of greed and power. Hold them back so that everyone has an opportunity to cross over on dry land. Give us that strength and that courage and that wisdom as we continue to seek to walk in the ways of Jesus the Christ, in whose name we pray. Amen.